Hi, I'm Funding-Fitzgerald from North Dakota State University, and I'll be talking about a roadmap to funding Indigenous-Driven research agendas at every career stage, first steps via the DLI Fellows and Partners program. This slide has a QR code on it, as well as a link. It's the same link. And I have at least one other slide with a QR code so you can find resources for what I'm talking about on the web by just taking a photo of the QR code. So earlier we heard about the National Science Foundation, National Endowment for the Humanities Joint Partnership, DLI-DEL. From 2015 to 2019, I was the NSF Program Officer for Documenting Endangered Languages. And I spent 4 years doing many things, including DLI outreach on NSF. And when I talked about NSF, I didn't just talk about DEL, I talked about a range of kinds of funding opportunities. The Graduate Research Fellowship Program, postdoctoral opportunities. These outreach presentations ranged from lots of different kinds of audiences, whether it was at the Linguistic Institute or an annual Linguistic Society of America meeting or other conferences that were primarily Indigenous in terms of the audiences. This is a picture of my computer as I was about to give a presentation at the Washington State Tribal Early Language Summit, which was hosted by the Muckleshoot Tribe in 2018. So as I did that work, I saw the impact. I saw how it changed the kinds of projects that got submitted and how we could build capacity in the discipline to provide funding for projects that brought different perspectives and different epistemologies into our discipline. So this particular project, the DLI Fellows and Partners Project, is funded by a grant that was awarded to me in 2020, the Strengthening Capacity in Dynamic Language Infrastructure for Tribal Nations. The grant number is right there. And the goals overall are very in line with what National Science Foundation has as its goals: to strengthen capacity, in this case in language infrastructure for tribal nations, to diversify the pool of investigators and the research questions and epistemologies. And so NSF often talks about broadening participation, as we saw earlier, in terms of diversifying the pool of investigators, and to advance fundamental knowledge here in the language sciences. The structure of the program that was designed was first recruiting potential fellows and partners, and doing this we're paying special attention to highlighting the realistic level of commitment that's needed to write a successful NSF grant. Using grant writing training to demystify the elements of the NSF grant process, especially merit review. Pairing prospective Native American PIs with a linguist partner during that training, but most importantly, throughout the grant writing process. Many times after the grant writing workshop, the grant writer's on their own, and the resources they had during the workshop aren't available. And then requiring an early draft and convening a capstone mock review panel so that principal investigators, PIs, could get critical feedback on their proposal early enough to improve it before the submission date. The outcomes for this project were, and also for the language sciences, so we had outcomes that are anticipated not only for the fellows themselves, but also for the linguist partners and for the language sciences. And so one outcome is that it will lead to the creation of proposals that are focused on questions largely shaped by Native Americans. The insights of these PIs about their languages and cultures are likely to lead them to focus on important research topics that probably have been neglected by outside scholars. And by doing this, they will expand the range of scientific advances that can be supported by research on Native American languages. So this in turn will allow Native American theories of language to inform linguistic theory in a parallel way as data from Native American languages has informed linguistic theory. And so this kind of implication could be transformative for the study of language. So when we talk about DLI fellows and we talk about DLI partners, a fellow is someone who's involved with their tribal language activities, is interested in applying for an NSF grant, and has been selected by the program. A DLI partner is a person who has some kind of experience with writing, submitting, or reviewing and evaluating NSF grant proposals, and has committed to provide support to the DLI fellow. The responsibilities included attending virtual training sessions scheduled for May 24th to 27th, 2021, what we call the Maymester, to work on the grant all summer, guided by the key milestones we provided to them so they can make sure that they had completed all the elements required for the draft deadline. We expected a complete draft so that we could have a capstone mock review panel and have the grant be reviewed. And then you're required to revise and submit the grant by the agency deadline. And here's another QR code that will take you to the full agenda, including the homework. But the Maymester agenda and highlights, we really drew on the virtual Breath of Life Archival Institute that was organized by the Advocates for Indigenous California Languages Survival. Carly Tex and Leanne Hinton presented on this in 2021 ICLDC. So this involved short presentations, about 15 minutes, on topics like what does it mean to create knowledge in the DLI-DEL way, and a review of intellectual merit and broader impacts. The fellow and partner pair went into a breakout room and then would work on articulating responses to particular prompts that were driven by the grant components itself. And then they would, as they were articulating those, draft them out in writing in a shared Google Doc. Breakout sessions were followed by group sharing. Everyone had homework at the end of each day, and we began each day with a reflection. So this was a 3-hour block, although that last hour was optional and could be used to work on the homework. So the fellows were responsible for drafting and revising the grant. The partners played the critical role of supporting by reading, revising, providing feedback. The teams got resources on the different grant components, slide decks, other materials. We had office hours and consultations for additional support, and then a draft deadline of August 1st, which was required to include the set of elements, not just the project description, in other words. For the mock review panel, I used the experience I had in running panels and finding reviewers, and was able to draw on some subject matter experts as well as advisory committee members and myself, so people could see how NSF handles review. People attended the mock review panel of their proposal so they could see not only what they needed to do to strengthen their proposal, but also see a simulation of NSF's review process. And ultimately, by getting that critical feedback, we were hoping to provide them a real valuable perspective on how external reviewers might evaluate the proposal. So reviewers were given a template that mimicked NSF's form and used intellectual merit, broader impacts, and the solicitation-specific criteria. So just like panelists or reviewers would for NSF for this program, or really for any program that has solicitation-specific criteria. So the 2021 cohort, it was selected from the applications that were submitted by appropriateness of the project for DLI-DEL, and also the fit with the goals of the specific grant, which was not just to increase the number of Native American PIs, but also to increase projects driven by questions created by Native American PIs, research methodologies, and epistemologies. We accepted 7 pairs into the cohort. 3 of those pairs had pre-existing relationship, and we had 5 proposals submitted in September 2021. 1 didn't survive compliance checking. The other 4 are still under review. So 4 out of the 7 proposals were submitted for that September deadline. The other 2 proposals were dissertation grants, and that's got an anytime deadline. It's possible there might be a 2022 cohort. I did actually open the application link. We had been planning to have a cohort of DLI fellows to attend CoLang 2022 at the University of Montana. Carly Tex and I will be facilitating that workshop, Indigenizing the National Science Foundation, focusing grants on questions shaped by Native Americans. So to conclude, NSF has found numerous ways to conduct outreach to prospective PIs as a tool to help increase grant submissions and success. The DLI Fellows and Partners program drew on the knowledge base of successful tribal academic models, like the Breath of Life, my own experience in these successful approaches by NSF and in tribal academic partnerships, as well as finding reviewers and running NSF panels. I think it's important to note diversity in grant review panels can foster diversity in what is funded. But underlying this program were the many successful outreach and building capacity activities that DLI-DEL has funded, including Natives for Linguistics, in efforts to create a more inclusive language sciences.